To cap all, the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford actually expelled 6 students from the university because they held Methodist tenets and took on them to pray, read, and expound scripture in private houses. To swear extempore, it was remarked by some, brought an Oxford student into no trouble. But to pray extempore was an offence not to be borne. What were the morals of 100 years ago? It may suffice to say that dueling, adultery, fornication, gambling, swearing, Sabbath breaking, and drunkenness were hardly regarded as vices at all. They were the fashionable practices of people in the highest ranks of society, and no one was thought the worse for indulging in them. The best evidence of this point is to be found in Hogarth's pictures. It was the popular literature of 100 years ago. I pass over the facts who Bolingbroke and Gibbon and Hume, the historian, were all deeply dyed with skepticism. I speak of the light reading which was most in vogue. Turn to the pages of Fielding, Smollett, Swift, and Sterne, and you have the answer. The cleverness of these writers is undeniable, but the indecency of many of their writings is so glaring and gross that few people nowadays would like to allow their works to be seen on their drawing-room table. My picture, I fear, is a very dark and gloomy one. I wish it were in my power to throw a little more light into it, but facts are stubborn things, and especially facts about literature. The best literature of 100 years ago is to be found in the moral writings of Addison, Johnson, and Steele. But the effects of such literature on the general public, it may be feared, was infinitesimally small. In fact, I believe that Johnson and the essayists had no more influence on the religion and morality of the masses than the broom of the renowned Mrs. Partington had on the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. To sum up all, and bring this part of my subject to a conclusion, I ask my readers to remember that the good works with which everyone is now familiar did not exist 100 years ago. Wilberforce had not yet attacked the slave trade. Howard had not yet reformed prisons. Raikes had not established Sunday schools. We had no Bible societies, no ragged schools, no city missions, no pastoral aid societies, no missions to the heathen. The spirit of slumber was over the land. In a religious and moral point of view, England was sound asleep. I cannot help remarking, as I draw this chapter to a conclusion, that we ought to be more thankful for the times in which we live. I fear we are far too apt to look at the evils we see around us and to forget how much worse things were 100 years ago. I have no faith for my part, and I boldly avow it in those good old times, of which some delight to speak. I regard them as a mere fable and a myth. I believe that our own times are the best times that England has ever seen. I do not say this boastfully. I know we have many things to explore, but I do say that we might be worse. I do say that we were much worse 100 years ago. The general standard of religion and morality is undoubtedly far higher. At all events, in 1868, we are awake. We see and feel evils to which 100 years ago men were insensible. We struggle to be free from these evils. We desire to amend. This is a vast improvement. With all our many faults, we are not sound asleep. On every side, there is stir, activity, movement, progress, and not stagnation. Bad as we are, we confess our badness. Weak as we are, we acknowledge our failings. Feeble as our efforts are, we strive to amend. Little as we do for Christ, we do try to do something. Let us thank God for this. Things might be worse. Comparing our own days with the middle of the last century, we have reason to thank God and take courage. England is in a better state than it was 100 years ago.